Something about that load taught me that being innocent doesn't prevent anyone from becoming walking evidence. I just didn't know that the evidence was forming on top of me like fine dust, layer by layer, until it became impossible to shake off. The journey began in Mobile, Alabama, bound for a container yard in Beaumont, Texas. I was pulling a 53-foot dry van loaded with pallets of automotive parts, sensors, wiring harnesses, hard plastic boxes, all sealed and with clean documentation. It was the kind of freight that pays well precisely because it's boring. The truck was a dark blue Kenworth T680, unassuming in the twilight. No stickers, no flashy license plate on the windshield. I liked looking like just another one. I had a technical habit that few people notice. I recorded refueling and stops not only by odometer reading, but also by idling time and the truck's position. I did this because of an old battery and alternator problem that had left me stranded years before. Since then, I've noted everything: time, approximate location, how long the engine was running, and whether I parked facing forward or in reverse. On the first day, nothing seemed out of the ordinary. I drove along I-10 to the Biloxi area, took a smaller exit to avoid traffic, and stopped for lunch at a simple gas station, one of those with 3 old pumps and irregular parking. The wind was blowing from the sea, carrying fine sand that sticks to anything. I ate quickly, got back in the truck, and continued on my way. 2 hours later, I noticed the first strange detail. On a straight stretch of road near Gulfport, a white pickup truck appeared in my rearview mirror and stayed behind me at an unusually consistent distance. Not tailgating, not aggressive, just calculated. When I changed lanes to overtake a slower truck, it didn't follow. It stayed where it was. When I returned to my lane, it didn't change either. It seemed like distance was the goal, not position. I ignored it. On the road, the brain tries to make sense of the noise. Late in the afternoon, already in western Mississippi, I stopped at a quiet rest area to use the bathroom and stretch my legs. I wasn't there for even 15 minutes. When I returned, I noticed that someone had left a thin, yellow plastic strip stuck between the fender rubber and the metal support. It wasn't something the wind easily put there. It was as if it had been inserted with fingers, in a spot that almost no one looks at. I pulled, and the strip came out whole, without tearing. It had no brand, number, nothing. I threw it away and checked the rest of the truck. Seal intact, doors closed, nothing tampered with. The tape stayed in my head for a few kilometers and then disappeared. The next morning, the sensation returned in a different form. Near Baton Rouge, Louisiana, I noticed that whenever I slowed down because of traffic, a dark car would appear out of nowhere on my left side, pull alongside for a few seconds, and then fall back. It didn't accelerate to pass. It didn't hold its position. It just appeared, pulled alongside, and disappeared. On 3 different occasions. Later, inside Texas, I stopped at a larger parking lot near Orange to shower and sleep for a few hours. I parked on a corner, my rear end facing a fence. As I went to close the curtains, I saw a very faint red light flashing on the asphalt, as if someone had a device pointed downwards. The light wasn't coming from above. It wasn't from a lamppost. It was coming from somewhere behind the truck. I got out and walked around. Nothing. No cars tailgating me, no one nearby. Just the asphalt and the distant hum of refrigerated trailers. I went back, locked the door, and lay down. The light didn't come back on. On the 3rd day, I woke up with a feeling of unease that wasn't fear, but operational distrust. Before leaving, I calmly walked around the entire truck. That's when I noticed a small transparent square stuck to the lower corner of the right rear reflector. An almost invisible sticker, the size of a fingernail, that altered the brightness of the reflector in a minimal way. I knew it hadn't been there before. I ripped off the sticker and put it in the booth, inside a small plastic receipt bag. Not out of heroism, out of an auditing instinct. I left the parking lot, and for about 2 hours everything seemed normal. Then, the small disruptions began. A garbage truck crossing a narrow street just as I needed to turn. An improvised roadwork without a sign with crooked cones which forced me to slow down almost to a stop. A car parked partially on the road on a curve, forcing me to swerve into the next lane for a few seconds. Each isolated event was common. Together they created a pattern. I was being pushed towards specific speeds at specific points. Late that afternoon, I stopped again, this time at a smaller gas station in Winnie, Texas, to fill up with diesel. As the pump ran, I saw something that gave me a different kind of thrill. A man on the other side of the parking lot took a picture of my truck, not a tourist photo. His cell phone was at chest height, focused on the rear. He took the picture and put the device away as if marking a milestone. I finished refueling, grabbed the receipt, and went back to the truck without looking again. I didn't want to turn it into a confrontation. I wanted to get out of his line of fire. I drove for another 2 hours and stopped to sleep in a rest area on US 90, away from the heavy traffic. I was tired, but I didn't fall asleep quickly. My mind kept racing with hypotheses. Cargo theft didn't make sense. The cargo was ordinary, and there had been no attempt to break into the trailer. So why would someone put up small markings and follow them with such precision? On the fourth day, the answer began to take shape without fully revealing itself. I took an industrial route to avoid a traffic jam on I-10, turning onto wide access roads to warehouses, near a corridor of warehouses in Baytown. I had done this before. What I hadn't done was pass through there at exactly that time. Traffic was slow, and I moved at less than 20 miles per hour for several blocks. Trucks, service vans, forklifts crisscrossing entrances. I occupied the entire lane, and because of my length, I created a moving wall. Side visibility, for those on the other side of the street, was cut off for long, repeated seconds, as if someone were opening and closing a curtain. That's when I saw, in the convex mirror, a dark sedan following behind me at the same calculated distance as the first pickup truck. The difference was that now I could see its intention better. The sedan didn't want to get close. It wanted to stay hidden within my shadow. Whenever I passed a warehouse entrance, the sedan slowed down too. When I accelerated a little, it accelerated a little. It was synchronization, not coincidence. I felt a chill in my stomach because I understood the purpose of the sticker on the reflector. It wasn't for me. It was for them. Something that allowed them to precisely identify my truck among dozens of white trailers. A reference marker. In that industrial area, I noticed another detail. At 2 different intersections, regular vehicles were waiting with their turn signals on, but they weren't turning. They were waiting for me to pass. Not because I was blocking their path, because I was blocking their view. They wanted to use my truck body as cover to cross from one side to the other, without being seen by cameras or anyone on the other side. I had no proof. I had a feeling. And the feeling grew heavy when I heard in the distance muffled sirens that weren't getting closer. They just existed in the background. I kept driving, trying to maintain a constant speed, without doing anything abrupt that would draw attention to myself. 15 minutes later, I left the corridor of warehouses and entered a larger avenue. The sedan disappeared down a side street as if it had never existed. The traffic parted. The world returned to normal far too quickly. I arrived at my destination, unloaded in Beaumont at the end of the day, and concluded the trip. No official incident, no questions asked, no damage. 2 days later, already in a cheap motel in Lafayette waiting for another delivery, I saw a short article on a local Texas website. It reported a robbery of high-value electronic equipment from an industrial warehouse in Baytown, carried out in broad daylight with clean logistics, no confrontation, and no alarms triggered in time. The report mentioned a blind spot in the external cameras, caused by heavy and poorly synchronized traffic. It said that the truck that repeatedly passed in front of the gate at the critical moment had not been identified. I read that 3 times, not because it was shocking, because I recognized the feeling. The road had given me micro-delays, and the micro-delays had built the window. That same night, I took the small bag where I had kept the reflector sticker and examined it under the lamplight. The material had such a thin metallic layer that it was almost invisible. It wasn't an ordinary sticker. It was something designed to reflect at a specific wavelength, probably infrared. The yellow tape, the transparent square, the dim red light on the asphalt, the photos at the gas station. It was all part of a single mechanism. I wasn't being robbed. I was being calibrated. They tested my behavior in real time, where I stopped, how long I stayed, how I reacted to micro-obstacles, whether I changed route, whether I accelerated to get away. When I followed the pattern, I turned the curtain perfect. I could have reported it. I could have taken the sticker to a police station, but what would I say? That my truck was used as a cover and I only realized it later? No license plate, no face, no fixed vehicle, no crime scene in my presence. I knew how that would sound. I also knew that if I insisted, I would put my name on a report that someone, somewhere could look up. The only concrete thing I did was change how I exist on the road. I started checking reflectors and bumpers with the same attention I previously reserved for tires. I stopped choosing alternative routes for convenience when they crossed industrial corridors, and I stopped believing that nothing happened means nothing was done. The following week, while driving east on I-20, I saw a white pickup truck in my rearview mirror for a few minutes. It kept a steady distance and then disappeared. I didn't try to prove anything. I just maintained my speed and let the first rest area pass. Some crimes don't attack you. They use you for who you are. And the hardest part wasn't accepting that it happened. It was accepting that I'll probably never know how many times it happened without me realizing it. If you're enjoying these chilling stories, don't forget to like and subscribe to the channel. Turn on notifications so you don't miss any more terrifying tales to come. Now, get ready for another journey down dark and mysterious roads. The first sign that something was wrong didn't come from a noise, but from the lack of one. That night, the yard breathed like any other. Engines idling, compressor kicking in, people laughing near the convenience store. Underneath my truck, however, there was a silence too dense to be just an absence of sound, as if someone had turned off the world in that patch of ground. I only understood what that meant weeks later, when it became clear that my parking spots weren't used only by me. My name is Jason Miller, a long-haul truck driver. I primarily drive between Texas, New Mexico, Arizona, and Nevada, hauling dry cargo in a box trailer. No expensive electronics, no junkyard-bailed ghost cargo. My life revolves around docks, shoulders of the road, and the cab's mattress. I have a habit of checking tires, seals, and fuel tank every morning, but I never thought it was worth paying close attention to what was happening under the truck, until the road forced me to. The first clue appeared on a humid night in Lafayette, Louisiana. I had pulled into a large truck stop, one of those chain ones, with a 24-hour store and a line of trucks waiting for a space. I parked in the back, did a quick inspection, and climbed into the cab so tired I barely remember lying down. I slept soundly, without interruption. When I got off, already bathed in the morning light, everything seemed normal until I got close to the rear wheel on the passenger side. Leaning against the chassis was a small pile of trash that I hadn't left there. A torn instant noodle package, 2 empty seasoning packets, a water bottle cut in half and used as a bowl. It wasn't trash scattered by the wind. It was clustered in a spot where only someone crouching or lying down could comfortably reach it. My mind went straight to the easiest explanation. Another trucker must have stopped right next to this truck before, I thought. Someone had dinner leaning against my truck and left. I hadn't seen anyone, but it was easier to believe that than to consider anything else. I kicked the trash near the bin, checked the rest, and continued my journey. The problem was that it started happening too far from Lafayette to be a one-off occurrence. In El Paso, Tucson, Phoenix, Las Vegas, it didn't matter. If I made a long stop, 6 or 7 hours, the next morning there would be the same kind of trace on that same piece of truck. Cheap food wrappers, cut bottles, bread scraps, cigarette butts all very similar to each other. Sometimes a low handprint on the metal, as if someone had leaned there to get out from under the truck. There was never any sign of an attempt to break into the cab. The seal on the cargo area remained intact. No cuts in the tarp, no scratches on the tank. Just that square of shadow treated as a temporary room. What bothered me there wasn't the existence of people who were getting by in a truck stop parking lot, but rather the precision. There were no requests for help, no conversations, no attempts at contact. There was a silent, repeated, calculated use of the exact same spot under my truck, in different states, weeks apart. After about 8 occurrences, I stopped calling it a coincidence. The idea that my routine had become a point of reference in someone's life began to weigh on me. And it was at a rest area near Deming, New Mexico, that I decided to stop pretending I didn't see it. That night, I decided to test reality. I parked in a side space, with the passenger side facing a continuous strip of shade, away from the main flow of traffic. Before pulling back the curtain, I left a tiny gap through which I could see a patch of ground reflecting the yellow light of the parking lot. I turned off the cabin lights, lay down, but kept my mind alert. Around 2:30, the yard was almost completely quiet. The engines that were still roaring seemed more distant. In my field of vision, a shadow stood out. It wasn't a trucker walking upright with a towel in his hand. It was a short silhouette, body leaning forward, moving between the trailers, disappearing and reappearing as it used the trucks as cover. The figure circled the back of my trailer and disappeared from my sight for a few seconds. Then I noticed the subtle change. The metallic glint in the corner of my eye dimmed as if something had filled the space below. The cab swayed so little that anyone else would have blamed it on the wind. I knew it wasn't. As the sky began to lighten, I got out with an uneasy certainty. I feigned some routine, took a wide turn, and stopped at an angle that would allow me to see better what was under the truck. The space was now empty. The guest had left before the first bright light, but the makeshift room remained all set up. A piece of cardboard marked by the weight of a body, a cut bottle, dried food scraps, a blanket so thin it looked like an old dishcloth. The dust traced the exact shape in which he had lain, squeezed between the chassis and the floor. Among the debris, something small stood out, a notebook with a cracked plastic cover, almost the same shade of dirt as the ground. If it hadn't been half open, I wouldn't have even noticed. I picked it up, wiped the worst of the dust off my trouser leg, and opened it right there kneeling on the gravel. The pages weren't filled with complaints. They were lists. Each line had a date, place, and short observations. Truck stop I-10 exit 143, side parking spaces, loud noise, good. Gas station in Las Cruces, camera facing backward, avoid. Rest area near Phoenix, little traffic, max. 3 a.m. White truck with blue logo on the door, always there after 2 a.m., sleeps soundly. With each page I recognized places I had already been, now mapped from bottom to top. Notes about shadows, noise, cameras, cleaning schedules. On several pages, small mentions of the same truck. White cab, box trailer with a specific brand, parking space pattern, time when the cab lights go out. In other words, me. At the end of one of the pages, there was a sequence of times. Arrives 1:40 a.m., fiddles with the cabin 2:05 a.m., silence until 3 a.m., wakes up 7:10 a.m. The handwriting was firm, tight, like someone writing quickly in the dark. Someone had stayed close enough, for enough nights, to know not only that I slept soundly, but exactly when. I closed the notebook and felt the courtyard narrow. I wasn't being followed by a car on the road, nor watched by someone at the gas station. I was unwittingly part of someone's calculations, someone who needed my predictability to fit their own night into place. I put the notebook in the cabin and spent the next day driving on autopilot. I delivered, refueled, ate, talked on the radio, but half my mind remained stuck on that image. A stranger using the time I rested to exist beneath me, noting how much silence he gained each time I turned off the engine. The chance to see who he was came on a cold night near Flagstaff, Arizona. The truck stop was emptier than usual, and the wind was making the metal crack. I parked in a side spot as always and decided I wouldn't just observe. I wanted to look into the face of the person who had turned the back of my truck into a bedroom. I turned off the engine, darkened the cabin, and listened. Around 2 a.m, the yard seemed to have shrunk. That's when I heard the sound I already knew how to distinguish from any other, the restrained dragging of a soul on gravel, slow, close to the truck. The noise came from the rear, ran along the driver's side, and stopped exactly in the area between the tank and the axle. I got out calmly, like someone just going to the bathroom. I walked a few steps towards the store, suddenly changed course, and returned silently, skirting the bumper. I crouched down abruptly and aimed the flashlight beam at the center of the gap. The light found a face too young for that degree of exhaustion. Late 20s, early 30s perhaps. Skin marked by the cold, sparse beard, eyes too light within that dusty background. He was lying on his side on the same type of cardboard, a thin blanket wrapped around his waist, a small backpack pressed against his chest. When the light hit him, his body stiffened. But he didn't scream, didn't apologize, didn't raise his hands. He only tucked his chin in, as if expecting to be ripped away from there. The fear in his eyes wasn't that of a thief caught red-handed. It was the fear of someone who'd been chased away so many times that he'd learned to shrink back first and never speak. For a few seconds, nobody moved. The distant hum of a compressor broke the silence. I didn't know what to say, and he seemed to have decided that silence was his only chance of remaining whole. He moved first. He exhaled in a short breath, turned his body with trained agility, crawled backward using the cardboard as a track, and exited on the opposite side, where the shadows of the other trucks were denser. When I circled around mine to try and follow, I only saw his back moving away towards the darkness behind the yard, walking quickly but not running. He disappeared among sparse trees and scrap metal, as if he had already practiced that escape route with other trucks on other nights. I went back under mine. The room was still set up: blanket, cardboard, cut bottle, a pair of fingerless gloves. In the middle of it all, something metallic caught the flashlight's attention. I picked it up. It was a thin metal tag, attached to a worn cord, the kind hospitals use for identification. The writing was scratched, but still legible. Ryan Cole. Below, a number and the initials ER. The notebook gained a face, a place of origin, a piece of history. In some emergency room somewhere, that guy's life had shattered and the rest of the journey he was making clinging to the shadow of trucks. I kept the nameplate along with the notebook in a compartment in the cab that almost no one opens. After that night, I kept driving. The difference is that from then on, every long stop got a little more attention. Before climbing into the cab, I look under the truck, not out of fear of someone being ready to attack me, but because now I know that space isn't as empty as it seems. Most nights there's nothing but dust, dried oil, and bits of road stuck to the metal. On a few rare occasions, I find fresh traces, replaced cardboard, new packaging, a recent crumb. I never saw Ryan's face again, but I recognize the kind of silence that appears when someone is hiding and hoping you won't look. The mechanics are simple and cruel at the same time. Truck drivers are creatures of habit. We repeat routes, schedules, parking preferences. Those with enough time and desperation transform this into a map of shelter. There's no pursuit in the classic sense, no robbery plan. There's someone clinging to the predictability of life on the road to avoid sleeping leaning against a wall in a big city. Today, when I park the truck in a darker corner of the yard and turn off the engine, I think twice before calling that my spot. Maybe on some other night, someone else will be counting on that same patch of shadow as the difference between waking up alive or not. I continue doing what I've always done, carrying sealed boxes from one point to another for people who don't know my name. And somewhere out there, maybe Ryan, maybe someone else like him, continues holding a dirty notebook, noting times, engine noises, and which trucks sway less when he hides underneath them. The road is sold as a place of freedom. On the asphalt, it seems that everyone is going somewhere by choice. But there are people for whom the only possible path leads precisely to the point where nobody looks. The thin shadow under a truck parked in a forgotten yard. The night I understood that the road can also be set up against a trucker began without anything special happening. Familiar route, clear weather, forecast of little traffic. Only later did I realize that precisely because it was so predictable, I had become the ideal target. Everything on that trip had a rhythm prepared for me, from the first slow car to the last point where there was almost no shoulder. The feeling that nothing there was random came too late, when the space to decide had practically run out. I left Amarillo heading towards Albuquerque with a load of air conditioning equipment, palletized cargo well secured, nothing of high apparent value. To anyone looking from the outside, it was just another truck crossing Texas towards New Mexico. The company wanted delivery before dawn because the client was going to open a new wing of the warehouse. I had accepted the freight for the combination that always appeals to me: decent pay, wide road, and little nighttime traffic. Even as I was leaving town, I felt the truck was responding well. Full engine power, clear weather, almost neutral wind, new front tires. It had all the makings of one of those nights where the biggest problem is finding decent coffee. I planned to cross the state border before midnight and stop at a gas station I knew after Tucumcari to rest for an hour before continuing on to Albuquerque. The first strange detail appeared near Vega. A dark, well-maintained sedan was ahead, maintaining a speed insufficient for the flow of traffic but not so low as to force someone to overtake hastily. I slowed down a little to maintain a safe distance and noticed that, each time I opened up more space, the sedan also slowed down a little, as if it were glued to my windshield. When my clearance increased too much, it would suddenly accelerate, only to repeat the same pattern a few minutes later. Nothing too drastic, but enough to be irritating. I tried to overtake him on a stretch with good visibility. He accelerated too. Not enough to pull away, but enough for me to give up the overtaking and back down. The situation repeated itself a second time. It seemed like someone was testing the patience of other drivers. I mentally classified the driver as just another idiot of the night and left the matter at that. Eventually, on a longer uphill stretch, the sedan pulled away and disappeared. A few kilometers later, another vehicle took on the role of anchor. This time, a light-colored pickup truck with some objects covered by a tarp in the bed. It entered the highway from a side-access road directly in front of my truck, without forcing its way in, without any burst of speed. It moved into my lane so smoothly that, if I had been distracted, I wouldn't have even noticed. It maintained a speed similar to mine, fluctuating just enough so that I never fully stabilized. It would spend a few minutes at a comfortable distance, then slow down a little, forcing me to take my foot off the accelerator. When I, reflexively, slowed down further to regain space, it also slowed down, maintaining the same difference. I only started connecting the dots when I noticed the pattern. Every time I had a clear stretch of road, some vehicle would appear ahead, controlling my speed. When I felt my irritation growing, an opportunity would open up. I'd take a deeper breath, pick up speed, and soon another anchor would appear. Each hook placed me on a specific stretch of highway, exactly when someone needed me. After passing Adrian, the traffic practically died down. The night grew denser with few headlights coming from the opposite direction. The pickup truck ahead continued to set the pace until it slowly pulled out to a small rest area with no sign of a known brand. I thought about stopping too, but my plan was the gas station after Tucumcari, so I continued on. It was at that moment that I noticed, through the rearview mirror, two distant headlights approaching from the right, coming from the rest area I had just passed. A dark van entered the highway but didn't come towards me. It stayed behind, maintaining a constant distance. The presence of the van didn't bother me immediately. What really weighed on me was noticing how, while it stayed behind me, another small car appeared ahead, again acting as a speed controller. 3 vehicles, in different areas of my rearview mirror and windshield, always arriving at moments when the road became too wide. The feeling of coincidence began to lose its power. When I crossed the border into New Mexico, the sky was completely covered in clouds, making the night even more overcast than usual. The highway continued with long lanes, few sharp curves, and a shoulder that sometimes disappeared. It was there that the driving became more aggressive. The car ahead slowed down a little more, forcing me to hold the accelerator firmly to avoid getting too close. The van behind slowed down as well without ever getting too close, as if I had been wedged into a fixed space between the two of them. I thought about getting off at the next town to break the pattern, but when the sign indicated a secondary access road a few kilometers ahead, I noticed the car in front accelerated again, as if it didn't want me to change course. The van kept its distance, as if it were ready to retake my position if I decided to get off. Suddenly, I realized that neither alternative seemed good. Continuing meant remaining within that corridor. Getting off at that specific point would mean slowing down too much and accepting that the van would easily catch up with me. Tension rose when I noticed a third vehicle stopped on the shoulder a few minutes later. A smaller truck with warning triangles and hazard lights flashing. The scene was common on any road, but its position, just after a gentle curve that slightly reduced visibility, seemed meticulously planned. The car ahead slowed down. The van behind did too. I was in the middle, with little room to maneuver, forced to slowly pass the scene of the supposed problem. I didn't see anyone asking for help. Only the outline of the smaller truck, stopped at a point where the shoulder almost disappeared. As I drove by, I felt the skin on the back of my neck crawl. Everything there seemed designed to make me uncomfortable, but without giving any objective reason to report it. There was no gun pointed at me, no explicit attempt to stop my truck, just constant monitoring of time and space. I decided to ignore the planned route and exit at the next access point, whichever it might be. When the sign finally appeared indicating a secondary exit onto a local road, the car in front of me accelerated sharply, as if it didn't want to get involved with that area. The van behind, however, approached a little closer than at any other time that night. My choice now had a clear price. If I exited, I would immediately have the van with me on a less busy road. If I continued, I would remain on the main road, with more eyes around, but at that controlled pace. I continued. I passed Tucumcari with enough fuel to reach the next large gas station after Santa Rosa. I could have stopped there, but the feeling of being watched made me want to reach a place with more activity. But there was no activity. The road remained strangely empty. The car in front disappeared completely as if it had finished its part of the route. The van behind stayed behind. A short time later, a pickup truck with a trailer pulled in front, slowing down smoothly, but enough to make me readjust my driving completely again. I could no longer say with certainty whether it was planning or paranoia. What weighed on me was the whole picture. Vehicles that always appeared at the right time stopped in improbable places, controlling my speed without ever openly engaging in criminal behavior. This prevented me from making drastic decisions, like immediately calling the police and saying I was being followed. What would I say? Which 3 or 4 drivers had an irritating right foot? Shortly before Santa Rosa, the road underwent a slight change in profile. The shoulder disappeared in a section under construction, leaving only concrete and metal barriers. The lanes became narrower, with cones and signs warning of reduced speed. There, the pickup truck slowed down more drastically, as if obeying the signage with excessive zeal. The van behind once again kept its distance. I, in the middle, began to perceive the road layout too clearly. There was no shoulder, nowhere to swerve the truck if something blocked the road. The concrete barriers limited any attempt to avoid something sudden. It was a funnel, and I was going in. That's when I saw further ahead another set of lights flashing on the right side, at a point where the construction left even less space. It looked like another stopped vehicle, supposedly in trouble, with cones positioned near the lane. The combination of elements made my breathing change rhythm. The slow car ahead, the vehicle stopped at the construction site, the absence of a shoulder, the van constantly behind. A sudden stop ahead would be enough to completely immobilize my truck in the middle of the night, in a narrow stretch with no witnesses and no escape route. The penny dropped hard. The whole night had been pushing me toward that spot. I had seen reports of cargo theft in prepared corridors, but I always imagined quick, brutal scenes full of noise. There, the logic was different. They had planned my route so that I myself would choose the worst possible position. They used my haste, my confidence on the road, my routine of keeping to a schedule. Everything in my favor until it turned against me. When the vehicle ahead started slowing down more than necessary, I felt the urgency reaching its limit. If I waited a few more seconds, I would be trapped between the obstacle in front, the van behind, and the side barriers. No amount of engine power would be enough to compensate for the lack of space. The decision came on impulse, and even today I'm bothered to remember it. Instead of holding back, I slammed on the brakes just enough to bring the van behind me closer than it had been keeping, but not enough to stop the truck. Then I floored the accelerator and aggressively steered the truck towards the area between the construction cones and the lane marking. It wasn't the shoulder. It was almost nothing, just a patch of uneven, dirty pavement. But at that moment it seemed like the only escape route. The truck shook so violently that every box in the trailer protested. The noise of everything adjusting in the back filled the cab as I forced the vehicle through the minimal space that remained. I saw, in a glance in the mirror, the van slow down sharply, as if it hadn't anticipated that maneuver. The car ahead braked harder than the signs required, creating a small controlled chaos in the construction corridor. But I had already broken through their line. I didn't look back for a few seconds. I kept my focus ahead, on the narrow lane, on the firm steering wheel. When I finally breathed, I realized the roadwork was ending. The shoulder was returning. The lanes were widening. The corridor was disappearing. And none of the vehicles surrounding me were coming from the same position anymore. The pickup truck had left. The van had disappeared. The vehicle that had apparently been parked at the construction site now seemed just part of the scenery. But I no longer had the courage to examine it closely. I drove to the next large gas station, parking the truck with my hands still trembling. I got out, walked around the vehicle, checked the tires, and saw if anyone had tampered with anything. Everything was intact. Only the dirt marks and some light scratches from gravel on the sides of the wheels betrayed the path I had forced. In the rest area, with a cup of coffee that was stronger than it should have been, I overheard two drivers discussing an incident a few kilometers back in the construction zone. They talked about confusion with stopped vehicles, a strange feeling, a pickup truck crossing lanes. No one mentioned gunfire, weapons, or robbery. To those who hadn't experienced the entire corridor, it seemed like just a problematic stretch of road. I didn't call the police that night. I didn't have license plate numbers noted. I had no proof of anything. Just a series of other people's decisions that, added together, almost placed me in a perfect position of vulnerability. I only spoke to the company supervisor days later, vaguely, more as a security alert than a formal complaint. Part of me still doubts how much was planned. Another part, however, knows how much time has passed to believe in coincidence. Since then, I never look at a slow-moving car in front of me the same way again. I no longer see just someone distracted or overly cautious. There's always the possibility that it's the first brick in a corridor I haven't yet fully seen. Traveling from city to city, night after night, I've learned that the road can be set up like a slow-motion trap, and that sometimes the terror doesn't come from what they do to you when they catch up, but from the belated discovery that someone began building their trap miles before you suspected anything.